So I'm really annoyed by YouTube as usual. Just another corporate entity. And so I can't go live. It seems to happen on Sundays. I think there's just an oversaturation of death scrolling, dopamine-inducing, non-horizontal, standard live streaming. So I'm going to be walking. I'm doing a little walk. Had a couple good training days. Going to do another one. Trying to get my bearings about me. Wanted to talk about some very pressing issues, very important information under the subject matter that I deal with constantly. As some of us are able to assert, I'm going to turn on the fan in this room. It's on. Some of us are able to delineate, understand, come down to this base action potential, for lack of a better, this protocol of this is the message that can be spread out through quantum mechanics, philosophy, and daily living. Like this is the naturalistic ontology. This is the life-drawing class of the universe. This is the truth about how violent movements, violent action, when we're talking about an exercise, a moment arm, a force velocity, the vector force, going through an explosive motion, how this, in this human form, exists within me, through me, and creates a continuance or a continuity from a base projectile violent explosion to a result or an outcome. And so I did a whole series on this. Well, I did one video, a 26-minute video this morning. I times 2'd the speed down to 13 minutes some odd seconds, and then split that up into 4 shorts, 3, 6, 9, 12, right? Obviously leaving out about a minute there of hang time, and then put it up as a video. And it was dealing with the Valsalva hold, right? Intra-abdominal pressure, and starting an exercise. Like Tom Platz has talked about this. He's talked about how really once you understand the pain and the force and the velocity, you will start to see squats as a religion. It grounds you literally. It squats you, it puts you squat. It forces you back down to the ground substance. It teaches you everything that the so-called pantheon of gods, if that's what they want to be known as, is causing this suffering, this insufferable reality on this earth in this temple state. And you can learn it through the action by way of the squat. Now what I want to impress upon you is that there's many people who will go throughout lifetimes avoiding this. They will put the icing on the cake before the cake is even baked. They're the ones that are never that good at anything. They couldn't be an instructor. They couldn't be a teacher of this, the purveyor of the understanding of this concept, that violence and understanding violent explosiveness, understanding the time under tension, the entire physiology, the kinetic chain that's involved, right? You won't understand anything if you don't get this, because you'll never survive. And that is to go through this explosive movement, this recoil. You can think of the snake, right? This load, explode, this action potential that involves the breath. You know, when you get into all these different traditions, from Buddhism to Taoism, all these traditions around the world, focus in on the primary aspect of breathing, right? Getting a little pain in my ankle. I did some calf exercises yesterday. Maybe we'll get a little stretch here. So I would be doing a live stream right now on this, and it would just be my typical banter. And it's not to say, when I say banter, it's not to reduce the impact force of the effect of how vital, how important this conversation is. Because there in a violent action, you have load, explode. You have the recoil. You have the action potential, and the ability for the rest of the physiology to endure time under tension, right? You have a 500-pound squat. That 500 pounds is feeling heavy. Your body is compacting, right? You can feel it. All your muscles are ready to go. You know how to do it. You know how to drive that weight back, but drive it up at the same time. You know how to look up and breathe. You know, just that angle of your head, right? That's going to create this firing pattern with your spinous system to just allow enough load in the glutes, in the adductors, around the vastus lateralis as one muscle group or one pillar to core synergistic dominance, right? The kinetic chain of musculature becomes exhausted. Your body is acute and capable of going into the next and to the outside existential onlooker. They wouldn't know it unless they'd been through it. So you have the spectator that's both involved in going through it with you, right? That goes beyond the observer. And you have there the outside observer who is either learning. This is the whole point to this. They're either learning from it, or they just see it as another action. They don't see the value of the fact that this is a squat. This is a squat from a dead position without any momentum, without any bounce, right? I jacked my back up and caused myself irreprehensible back nerve damage on my lower spine by bouncing off a bench. You got weak legs. You can't do it. You're used to doing all these cheat curls and seeing your arms grow, right, from doing those cheat curls. Then you hear people saying, oh, the cheat curls are okay. You just need to figure out your position. Maybe a bench curl will be better. And you kind of like take these, you get all mixed up with the compound exercises. Like, is a bar curl a compound exercise? No, because you're taxing primarily and using and forcing a smaller muscle to do the work, to do the action, right, to take over. But then the strange thing with the biceps, when you see professional bodybuilders with 24-inch arms or whatever, you got somebody who's, you know, definitely turned that muscle group into a larger muscle group than most people's larger major muscle groups, right? But not without a little PED prompting, right? And some people have defied this, but their body fat has gone up congruently. And there are very few people like this Epic of Gilgamesh that have been able to transcend this, or Heracles, Hercules, right? And this is primarily where all this mythos comes from. I don't deny that these people were probably, maybe even a whole tribe of peoples like this was in existence. It would blow our minds, you know, from just a mere physiological standpoint. And can you imagine being able to transcend gravity beyond what we even understand? Like, In other words, to go into a whole nother sort of hyper state of existence, hyperbolics, right? And to really get into these parabolic movements where it's like, you have the parabola and you have the hyperbola, right? You have this X shape, you have this definite shape of an altar, right? It gets into the pentagram. I mean, it's that different. The inverted pentagram over here and the dynamics of the four main principles that are talked about over and over again. That these principles are common, whether you're talking about a right-hand path or a left-hand path. So every movement is crucial, right? And if you show up every single day and you're willing to do the work and you're willing to train others on how to do this, on how to just understand how recoil, explode, getting to the zone pertains to whatever actionable deed they are undergoing at that time, everything becomes complex. The story starts to take on this fantasy, this paracosm, right? Where you don't have a directed understanding. You don't understand the base or the endpoint. And so people get really good at dealing with false ideology of democracy and egalitarianism, right? That leads into agrarian communities, farming communities, the base of what humanity is, right? That you're going to evade, really, and you're going to avoid anything that throws your cortisol off, right? And throws off your dopamine and your serotonin and your testosterone and your estrogen and the base to what you are. Because once you do this one time, you are fucking awake. Once you have to go through something with maximal effort, you have become awakened. Now that could be seen as a ridiculous statement by most people. But when you look at most people, they've never done this. They've never done something to its maximal. They've never ran as fast as they possibly could till the wheels fall off and actually been able to physiologically come up to that upper place, that upper shelf where they weren't obese, right? They weren't doing this out of sequence that wasn't in line with their genetic potential, that they were, in fact, as closely in line with their genetic potential in that one possible moment, right? I wish I'd done that more often, but preparing to break that barrier is, in essence, the symbol, the sign, right? The solution, right? So I have a hard time, and I don't think it's necessary, dissecting or delineating between the subjectivity, the thing that seems like this sort of mercurial abstract notion to talk about the star alignment, symbols and signs and sigils, right? Gematria. Like a lot of people just leave off there, but they've never taken the number notionally, right? Everything becomes nuance. And that's the place that we've reached in society, but that's not where I took it. I took it beyond, and it only tries to corrupt you. It says you're violent. It doesn't understand that violence is something that you have to learn. It knows how to lash out, almost like demonically, like and hiss at you. And threaten you with its violence. But when you find out that most animals that do this, and pretty much most people who do this, don't have the capacity, the ability to follow through with a violent action that will result in your demise or an assault on you, right? They know how to spit out vitriol, right? So this is what gets into politics, is that you have all these people who maybe even have done this, but they burned out on it. And it comes back to Tom Platz, believe it or not, where you got this guy who discovered a religion under that heavy ass squat bar, right? And I've done this. I've had this moment, maybe with far lesser weight, right? But I've had this moment, but hundreds of pounds, 400 plus pounds, where you're realizing I don't have to treat this exercise as if it's limiting me and that it's heavy. I can push through. I can maximize the number of repetitions. There's no reason why I couldn't do another one and another one and another one and another one. And that is when you become dangerous to this observable field of the other side, because you've broken past any continuity in any continuous forms. And because nobody was watching, it has to refute you. It has to make sure that nobody can ever look at you as someone who's about to break this next barrier, this next boundary, because it is entirely jealous. Or is it ingrained into the mathematics of the field around you that was postulated on the Occult Rejects last night, which was great. I actually think it was the Enids. It was from a couple days ago, I think. And then there was another one that closely followed it that was studying and looking at, on a whimsical notion, they had to put the show together because a guest had dropped out, the town of Saint Germain. And it's pertinent. It's pertinent because the Morai and Clotho is always tied into this, these three witches, right? That there is this ingrained jealousy, that the propensity, and this is not true today. Let me remind you of this. You've got plenty of women who are going, holy shit, I don't care about getting fat. I don't need to wear pink. I don't need to wear lipstick. I don't need to do steroids. I'm just going to start fucking lifting heavy and eating. And the beauty of it is that you begin to see that this heavy suppression has been keeping out the violent. When I say that, don't put on your feminist eyelashes quite yet. You get what I'm saying about that, don't you? I'm not putting down true feminism, because true feminism, like toxic masculism, comes to an endpoint where if you continue on, you'll realize it never existed. It's society that's keeping you in this notional aspect that it does exist. It's keeping you suspended in a state that otherwise would have never existed or been completely transitory. It is you realizing yourself and the directed linear male component of a violent action, but to see that everything, just like the bench press or the squat, right? Where you're driving back and driving up at the same time. I would demonstrate, but my legs are still pretty tight and sore. And we've been doing squats for months, but not until you load that bar up and get down that heavy barbell squat position and revisit it are you going to really understand what I'm talking about. It is a religion. It is a philosophy. And it's better experienced than stated, right? But in that one movement, you have the Valsalva hold, you have the time under tension, you have the load explode, right? You have this recoiling property, right? You have the test that is the most important thing that you could ever do in that moment. Right? And it took a lot of preparation, or did it? Because for people who understand this, right, you don't necessarily have to be put together to be, and I would say to some extent, the deadlift for some people is an equal experience, is an equal teaching method, right? But because we're hodgepodge together, because of our genetic infusing, and I'm not necessarily talking about races more than, like, there was a time when races were really discussed more as men of gold, silver, copper, right? That you had this lower, this shorter, more stout individual who could really think on their feet and do a variety of different, when we get into the agrarian aspects, you know, everything from tree climbing to hauling a lot of weight, jumping in on, on farming and being able to take over for that ox for a moment, right? To keep shit going, to do what needed to be done. And then you have more the men of silver who have a higher capacity for learning. They might be the foreman, right? On the farm. They might understand how to connect to the men of gold and to, of course, there's other tiers, but we're just, dissecting and delineating what race was really all about from Aristotelian perspective, right? That led on through Plato, that led on obviously through Socrates, Plato, and on into Alexander the Great, who may have misconstrued the whole thing, right? Because you see this dominance and this need to take over the world. But to understand violent force, violent action, really looking at like the movies like, 300, The Spartans, or The Gladiator, right? The original Gladiator, Russell Crowe, to really see what this was about, that there's no second chances, right? The reason that you're being thrown out there is just a mere trivial notional aspect of someone who's never been under the squat rack. They've never experienced a heavy barbell squat. They've never had to performatively go up into the higher upper measures of capacity, capability, and form follows function, right? And to show up every single day and do it and not get paid, but you're getting paid dividends through experience. So the people that are running the society today that is really extending out oddly through these civic arms of government organizations that don't really even exist, that spread out like a virus through the treasury, right? And reach into everything from, on one side, unofficial Rotary clubs, right? Elks lodges and so forth that can be directly affiliated back to not only the Eastern Stars, which is just a brood of witches worshiping a satanic pentagram, and Satana or hell is a female notion, but it's the toxic female notion. And that's what I really want to impress upon you, because what's going to happen is women are going to come under fire. For those who see, you have somebody like Charlie Kirk's wife, widow, if you will, who is an evil witch. She really is. And right now you may be offended by this, but over time you're going to see that this is exactly how these witches come into the station of being. There is a ritual out in front of you. Is there no hope for the widow's son? I really want you to think about that for a moment, because it's the pity that the siren places, or the mermaid, Starbucks, places on people to be able to gain advantage. In other words, throughout time immemorial, most women, it wouldn't have been thought of as ladylike to do something like a heavy compound lift, mastering it like a squat, right? And there were very few times in history, in fact, that's where a lot of folklore comes from, with these strong sort of Amazonian women, right, that would do something like this, didn't care about farting, smelling like a jock, right? Like, we're talking about females that are going through the assumed actionable focused deed, such as a maximal 1 repetition squat, right? Or a deadlift, right? In the form of a lifestyle, something that they needed to do, they wanted to do through the action of who they were, promoting themselves through a philosophy, a focus, and understanding that this is my breath, this is where I'm at, all the rest is illusion, nothing else matters, right? So it is the toxic feminine notion that is being supported in society, and then being met with the traditions of witchcraft or witch or literature, which would have died out without the assistance of technology, and has died out, but it was used through lesser magic. You can look at the lesser keys of Solomon, right? Lesser Enochian magical keys. This exists, right? And it's where women get a little bit, they get that door open for them. They can put on that, when they have a really bad day and they look like they have a pie face, they can put on that mascara, right? They can put on a fake smile. They can boost up their breasts. But if a man goes about doing this, stuffing socks down his jock, getting shirts that are tailor fitted to make it look like his shoulders and his chest are popping out, right? Then he's considered a narcissist. But all women, through the actionable deed of what they do, are in fact, by all comparison measures, narcissists, total narcissists. Toxic feminism has always existed in this society. That is what Atlantis is. That is why the Statue of Liberty looks like a man and performs like an evil witch through witch or literature, a woman, right? But when I talk about this, I'm not talking about the raw component that David Icke, who's that, Matwa, the Zulu chief, I just posted that up, and I have over years posted that up, well over the last decade, going on to spanning 12 to 15 years now. I've reposted that video back up because it's pertinent. It's important, because he talks about another origin story that can be compared to a lot of origin stories, but it talks explicitly about, and I don't want to derail this, because when we get into the serpent mind state, the Garden of Eden, when we get into the reptilians that David Icke has expressly talked about and written about, and also these 7 emanations of light and purification that are suggested, and that are suggested over and over again, is that once you see you're a part of the campaign, you have to be corrupted. There's no way through, right? And so a violent action is ultimately what this toxic femininity will do, off with his head, right? God save the queen. Because with the queen, you have Mother Circe. With the queen, you have Hansel and Gretel. With the queen, you have the Lady of the Wood, the Witch of the Wood, that will give you your cake, turn you into swine. Mother Circe, Church, Kirk. I'm going to tell you that it is no observable coincidence that I believe Charlie Kirk's wife is a toxic feminine witch, embodied, right, through this ritualization, where it was planned on a specific date at a specific time to take down the small-minded Charlie Kirk, who became a martyr, a sellout for an organization, a right, preaching ideologies that didn't exist until, like Kevin A. on Sean Atwood's channel recently. Kevin A. says he was just about to turn. He was looking at the whole situation and going, I can't do this anymore. There's more going on that I'm being pressed to preach about. But if I back out now, I'm essentially going against all of the people who have funded this, right? And you got to wonder what Trump is, right? Because you have a lot of these people who are fallen from grace, and they want us all to fall from grace. And I'm telling you that it comes back to this one simple, actionable deed. And you'll be shamed into thinking, whether you're male or female, that violence, right, done in the right time, in the right sequence, under the right measure, under the right light, becomes the force of promotion and the provability that you are greater because you trained and you understand this, right? It doesn't mean that's all you are. It means that the indexing and your capacity is far greater on all levels because you've gone through the hard times. You've gotten the hard-won action of reality, and it hates that. It hates that you can be autodidactic in this sense and learn this over and over again through lifetimes. But I guarantee, I know what a witch looks like, and I know that there's more than one witch embodying Charlie Kirk's widow, right? And that she is, in fact, an evil witch, and that she represents and embodies more than one witch. She's hosting a legion of witches through her. That she is, and so if you want to look into this more, you can look into the fact that she was Miss Arizona, I think, that she has gotten a law degree, a very high caliber law degree, that she is on a track and she has been talked to and she has been mentored by a horde of witches. And that, in fact, when you begin to look at all these processes like the moon child, the fact that all three of Aleister Crowley's children were in fact, female, right? He had 3 daughters, 3 kids. One of them died. So you have the representation of Clotho, right? And the Morai, the 3 witches, the young dying in childhood. Another one who disowns him, and another one who becomes a Christian. Right, so you have basically these 3 stages of affirmation of philosophy, right? They're being affected by outcomes. They're being told what they're going to be and what they're going to do by an organization that assumes itself as a hierarchy. I'm telling you that all roads lead back to witchcraft, but it doesn't discount the computational subset of the computational system. You follow? Because it is using females. It is the snake in the grass, right? Has crept its way into the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable situation, right? And it has taken advantage of, re-engineered and recreated a time signature, an event, using information that it could only come by way of through the machinating efforts of machinating, however the fuck you want to say the damn word, right? But of the left-hand path, right? So you have, in essence, it doesn't matter physically if they are, but people like Ted Rice, Barbara Turner to some extent, but mainly Ted Rice and his assertions, and David Icke and Matwa, the Zulu chief at that time, you have the statement that these are in fact reptilians. So whether it's a reptilian mind at its base, when you look at the limbic system or the amygdala or the olfactory or this shortcut with the pons, right, in the brainstem and the vagus nerve, right, the ganglionic mass behind your solar plexus that the Master Key likes to talk about, written by Charles F. Haenel, a high-level Mason. When you begin to get into the aspects of this, they want to keep you experiencing life and existence through a glandular state of secretions. They want to uphold the G-spot, the pleasuring of the female, the clitoris and the stimulation there, the cervix, right, the Skene's gland in operation. They want to promote this Ouroboros, this samsara, instead of realizing it only took one person in the state of being and becoming that actually failed us all and wanted to stand above everybody else because it realized that in their folly, in the expression of thelema, in the sexual acts of procreation, they had committed a terrible sin, right? That they had actually reached the state where they were supposed to be in this being and becoming state, this Lucifer, if you will, that I think is, my son has used this term Lucifina, Satana, could be heavily correlated to this, and Hell, H-E-L, or Mother Circe, Church, Kirk, Captain Kirk, right? That's also partly depicted by the Picards, right? Because there is an association with their John Felix Picard and his brother to say, Anton Picard, to see that this high altitude ballooning and another Swiss, invention here that led on to the cockpit that von Braun used in space and was used in a long withstanding testing procedure where this cockpit was used, specifically almost the exact cockpit, in trials that were used in river systems around the US. I don't know if that extended off into other areas, right? Where I believe other things were happening. There's a huge correlation to the ocean, oceanography, what's happening underneath the ocean, UAP and UFO. So what I'm telling you is be the best man you can, whether you were born a man or a woman. In other words, express. I'm not telling you to go through a sexual act. In fact, I'm telling you just the opposite. I'm telling you that staying in the union of the self and expressing the male component to understand violent action and to go through this in ways where you look at martial arts like Krav Maga or what's that other one? Sistema. There's many different names, right? Israeli martial arts, right? But you get into using leverage, right? Taking energy that's being thrust at you and being able to circulate that through chiral positioning back out to your opponent. You're just giving them the energy back, right? So you learn the law of reciprocation. Well, the same thing's happening and you're learning that through these violent mechanisms and actions from these maximal squats, right? And a maximal squat doesn't mean you just have to load on as much as you can do to hurt yourself one time. No, you work your way up to this and you might find yourself really sinking into where you didn't know if you could do one squat and suddenly you're pacing yourself and you're capable of pushing yourself, your Valsalva hold, the timing in your breathing, the time under tension, with all the training you've been doing, you are now capable of doing this axial load, right? And time it properly to where suddenly you're doing 5 reps and 8 reps and 10 reps. And I found myself with 445 pounds on my back doing it 20 times plus to where I became scared, right? Because I'm like, I shouldn't be able to do this. And I was at home. I could feel the floorboards at that time. I could feel the floorboards creaking. And of course, creeping through the door were people who had never pushed themselves. They were always in avoidance of this, right? They were those who can only put on a mock representation of threats, like the little cat hissing at you, but really not. But the cat at least will attack and has the ability to violently take out the action, and they're warning you. But you have these people who are spitting vitriol, who are entirely misaligned, who are demonic in essence, and they're the people who have never done a damn push-up in their life. They've never worked out in their life, and it's when you talk about exercising out demons, you don't know anything until you've gone through the physicality, the physical action, the action potential. You don't understand gravity. You don't understand what the world is trying to teach you, if there is anything to learn at all. So if you've never exercised before, learn how to do it. Load that fucking bar up. It doesn't matter if you've been in the gym and done vanity exercises. All of that is promoting toward one thing and one thing alone. And that is, and I'm not saying maximal effort from the standpoint of 1 rep max, but you'll be better in line with understanding what that 1 rep max is when you even get close to that and you start to performatively push yourself in the higher tier of maximal strength, right? That leads up to a total complete power movement. There is philosophy and there is a religion involved in the learning with a squat.